Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our ongoing discussion on our statement of philosophical liberalism. This is an episode that gives you a peek behind our curtains, this one, because we're really diving into our process. So, if you've been following along so far, you know we've spent the episode so far really even just going through tackling the core concepts in our introduction. But we're about to transition now into the real body of our statement, the real structure of our statement. And in this episode, Chris and I even just wanted to take a moment to reflect amongst ourselves about the structure. We're kind of taking a little journey down memory lane to think about what our process had and has been in generating this structure, why we've approached this statement and this project the way we have, give you some insight into our thinking, and then hopefully invite you as well, once you get a sense of what we've been doing, to join with us and come on this journey with us and be part of the next iteration. Because I think as you're going to see in this story, that iteration has been key to what it is that we've been doing. But I feel I've been talking a lot, so I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Welcome you. Thank you for joining with me for this whole project, and also for this conversation. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts. I know you've done a lot of work to even collect and organize and document your recollections about how we've proceeded, the what and the why of what we've been doing here with this statement.
Yeah, that's right. And thanks for that setup, Joy. It's great to see everybody again. Welcome back. And yeah, Joya said it was a process, and it really was. It was a lot of effort. I think I took the first uh, draft of the pen on it. So I guess that's why I'll start off with my recollections. But it became much more than we, I think, initially anticipated, and I think that speaks to, as Joya said, this is kind of a behind the scenes sneak peek of how we did this. The ultimate question that animates tonight's episode is why the three parts to our statement on philosophical liberalism. So we're gonna get into that. And I guess the way I would start about it, the way even as I was going down my own memory lane, recalling how we drafted this, because it's been over a year now, we really started with uh, quite a simple goal. We didn't certainly even have this kind of vision and structure that we ultimately landed on at the outset. That really only became apparent towards the end after we kind of had put it all together. But our simple goal at the start was really to just make a statement, our statement, on why a free society is valuable and important and worth fighting for. That's what we're all about here at 1776 Forward. It's in our mission statement, our full statement on philosophical liberalism, and even the manifesto when we founded this organization 5 years ago now, it's coming up on. But writing this statement even was as we started to progress into more active endeavors and initiatives to promote a free society. We realized we wanted to put a stake in the ground to define and clarify what we stood for, and clarify why we thought a new organization and ideal in freedom politics was necessary. So that was kind of the very basic goal of what we set out to do initially. But then, given both Joya's and my backgrounds as intellectual people with passions for and studies in philosophy, we also knew that to make that statement on why freedom matters, we needed and wanted to ground it in something deeper than just saying freedom is good because we live in America, or because history shows it works, or it feels right, or all these other things, which, not to knock on those, but that was not what we're about. And it certainly, we didn't think, would add anything new to the conversation. We wanted to ground this value fully and properly in a kind of is ought logical identification and connection to what it means to be human, really. And so that was kind of why we stepped back and realized, okay, this is going to be a little bit of a deeper statement. I'll pause there, if you want to add anything, even just for that intro, Joya.
I think you're definitely right that it is a reflection on you and me and our own interest in philosophy. And I think one thing that is certainly true about both you and I is that we are philosophical people, not in the sense of being professional philosophers, although I think that even is part of our approach, that I think we see ourselves more as action takers, people who want to create value in the world. I think we both identify really with that role of the entrepreneur in that way, but that our whole approach to entrepreneurship is to always think through the deeper questions, that we both absolutely resonate with that entrepreneurial approach of always asking first principles questions. I think we ask that about our businesses and we ask that about everything in our lives. And so, of course, we've asked that about a free society. And one of my recollections of this process was that as we were starting to have our very first conversations about what we wanted to do in arguing for a free society, it became very clear we came upon this term philosophical liberalism because we thought that really identified what our approach would be. But when we first started banting about that term, it was always in lowercase letters, lowercase philosophical, lowercase liberalism. And it was really this moment when we decided, okay, we want to write a statement about what exactly it is we mean. We want to define what do we mean by philosophical liberalism? And then it just became this whole process. And the end result is that we came up with a statement that we realized we really need to put capital letters onto because we
Mhm.
realized that we have come up with a very definitive meaning and vision for what we see as philosophical liberalism. And to your point, it was not an easy journey at all. It was certainly, from my perspective, painful at moments, just really even trying to get down to the nitty gritty of what exactly is it that we are trying to say. I feel in my editor voice, whenever I'm writing something, that's always what's happening, is that I'm putting forward some words out there in the first draft to just roughly get that approximation with that drive of emotion. And this is a general sense of what I mean. And then my editor brain is always going through and saying, okay, now what exactly do I mean by this? And it's never painful, but the result is always worth it, or at least it was certainly from my perspective in this instance.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more, and I share. We definitely shared in the pain. I think even between us, there were a couple times where we were, as editors to each other, we even said quite explicitly, "What do you mean by this, and where are we going with this?" So, the end result, for all of you out there who've read it, you can tell us how clear it is or isn't to you, but certainly it's much clearer than where we started, and it reflected a lot of work. And I'll just echo what you said. In fact, I just recently saw in another Substack writer recently use the term philosophical builders, and I really like that term. And I think I actually sent it to you, so you probably haven't had a chance to see it yet. But I
I
like that
follow
because I
that
think that
Substack
just
anyway, so yeah.
I think that describes what we're trying to do because it really does fuse this notion, as we've said throughout, that we're taking an entrepreneurial approach and trying to bring the entrepreneur's perspective on how to build tangible, real values and action orientation in the real world, but with a philosophical lens. So, that's definitely what we wanted to do. And with that in mind, I think we also wanted to we quickly realized that as we started to put pen to paper that we wanted to sketch a vision of something bigger than just politics that connected freedom to deeper needs and values for human life in a positive and aspirational way, and in that way making our this statement and our whole organization mission driven and something inspiring, not just we want freedom so that we have lower taxes and can keep more of our money, or so that there's less wars and less initiation of aggression, those kind of things. Because we're at our core, we are creators, philosophical builders, and we see politics really as a means to a greater end, not the end in itself. And so by sketching that vision, we hope to ignite a similar passion in others for the cause of freedom in the same way that we do personally have it. And we have that passion really for that grander vision. And so, as Joy said, we took an entrepreneurial approach, meaning let's start by asking some first principles questions about what is the nature of humans that leads us to the reason why we need and should want political freedom in order to achieve that nature. And in view of our desire to move forward and create something positive, we focus those questions specifically on our thoughts and insights about human nature at its best. Um, and as we started to do that, I think we also we drilled into that more, and that's why you see, I think, those themes in our statement, including right there in the beginning, in the intro, um, because we realized that, or at least I know I only after the fact realized why we focus so much on it is that it's important to you and I. We talk about it a lot, and that is the kind of grander vision or what for that freedom matters for us, certainly. But I at least don't hear many people talk about that concept or certainly freedom in terms of human nature at its best out in the world. And so I think that was just something else that we realized for our own desires and benefit that we wanted to give voice to. And then also something we could add value in the freedom discourse and community by focusing on this kind of first principles approach and specifically the human nature at its best angle that we kind of took on it.
I think if people haven't been following yet, they might not know that you and I first met back when we were both students at NYU. And interestingly, I think we eh, came to that experience with similar perspectives on this, although from coming from at it from completely different angles. But I think you and I, we've always been sort of focused on that question about human potential and how do we rise to live up to our potential? How do we achieve human greatness? As we've described it in earlier episodes, that we want flourishing and we want to go beyond flourishing to human greatness. And that's always been both a drive that you've had and I have had in our own ways and that have been expressed in each of the separate businesses that we have been building. I'll even get more into that in the next episode when we really dive into this topic of what we mean it by human
Mhm.
nature at our best. But at the outset, just to say here that certainly as we were thinking about, or at least I'll share as I was thinking about philosophical liberalism, that we wanted to try to ground it in a philosophy of what is human nature, but that for me, it wasn't enough to just think about what is the nature of humans, but the nature of humans that allows us to activate that potential within us, that allows us to strive for and reach toward our best. That really was the personal grounding for me and something that I think you and I can both bring to the discussion, bring to the world, and hopefully help inspire more people with that vision. That certainly that's why freedom matters to me, because I see its connection to what is great about human potential. And we just want to get that message out to as many people as we can.
Yes, well said. And as you alluded to, it was in asking that question, that first principles question of what is human nature at its best, that we arrived at ultimately those three core values of freedom, flourishing, and greatness that we spent so much time in our mini series going through, and that really kind of that is our answer to what does human nature at its best mean. Ultimately, that's the kind of end result or what for of why freedom matters. To echo your point, certainly what motivates me, and again, what we wanted to bring to the freedom discourse and the freedom conception, really. Like again, like I said, because I it was certainly something that was we felt lacking for our own benefit that we needed to give voice to. And as we talked about in last week's episode, about why those values matter to politics, we touched upon the character element of it. And I think it was as we went through this and then started to answer some of these questions on human nature at our best, we then also started to realize the importance of good character development for building a freer society. But it also raised some new first principles questions about what those conditions are that are needed to sustain and strengthen freedom over a lifetime, both in one's own an individual's life and across many humans organized and working together in society towards freedom. And so that led us down kind of further explorations on character development. And then I also think given our respective personal philosophies and just life experiences, have shown each of us the critical importance of character and ethics in achieving one's values, living a life of freedom, flourishing, and greatness that unlocks that potential that you mentioned, Joya. Um, and some of the ideals that we're going to touch upon in episodes to come that are mentioned in the statement in the next section we're moving into about the creator trader, the Renaissance human, pursuing continuous betterment, all of those things which we've touched upon already as components of freedom, flourishing, and greatness. Ultimately, like all of that, to us the connecting thread as we went through it is the importance of character. And so that tied well even into our ultimate goal of our organization, which is to spark political action and engagement ultimately towards building a freer society. We have this notion, I think you and I came to in writing this, about civic engagement as a key element of politics, and that inherently engagement of any form is inherently touches on ethical questions about character, virtue, behavior, action. So all of that is kind of a long-winded way of saying all of those insights or answers to the initial first principles questions then led us into further questions and answers on a very ethical focus. And I think you see that reflected ultimately in where the meat of the statement is, which is Article 2, where we say moral implications of kind of human nature at its best and kind of individual rights as the bridge to a free society. And so that was really that was perhaps the biggest value add, if you will, or new insight for us in writing this statement that came out of this whole process of question and answering and iteration, which is this kind of ethical focus on what matters in yourself and the person you want to build up in order to be worthy of freedom. As we say, it's living independently, interdependently with responsibility, and also to take the action necessary to maintain and grow a free society.
This might even be a good point to talk about what was certainly one of the major considerations in my mind as I was doing my work on the iteration of thinking what we needed in our statement, which was our goal of creating an organization around promoting a free society that could be essentially big tent, but not such a big enough tent that we let in our enemies or those who would ultimately try to subvert what we are all about. So we knew we needed some kind of grounding in deeper philosophical ideas, but without necessarily putting forward a full philosophy, a full system, because we wanted to just identify core principles that a diverse group of people could unite around, that we saw that as a way of kind of having a both and of having a unifying purpose, but allowing for the diversity of thought and the different approaches and backgrounds and perspectives of people who could come together and ultimately argue for and promote and advocate freedom in this way. And I think, as you pointed out, it's already somewhat reflected in our first article. It's a shorter article where we're aiming to talk about human nature at our best, but we certainly don't say anything close to everything there might be to say, even about human nature, let alone even that big topic of human nature at our best. Although interestingly, what we did pull out were precisely some of these both and principles. What in my work I call the luxury paradoxes, but they really even go back to ancient wisdom that recognizes that the human nature at our best is often about finding ways to integrate things that are seemingly opposed. All the way back, pre-linguistically to the yin and the yang, and certainly modern science has replicated that a lot of these insights really have a lot of truth and power for how we live lives of flourishing and greatness is by combining this both and perspective. But again, we just really tried to highlight a few of these principles that we thought were most important for the creation of a functioning free society. And then to go on to, as you're saying in Article 2, this is where I think we get the closest to being being systematic, although we certainly haven't put forward anything of what I think is even a full system, certainly not at all a full system of virtues. Although anyone who looks at the statement will see we set ourselves the goal to come up with 10 virtues that we thought were key for promoting a well-functioning free society, and we ultimately narrowed it down to 11. And personally, I don't even think these are the only 11, but we at least narrowed this down to that if we had these 11, that this would certainly provide grounding for a very viable free society, with this insight from the founders that you can't really have a free society without individuals who cultivate virtue. And of course, the founders thought in terms of perhaps the ancient Roman Stoic values and certain Christian values. And while ours perhaps incorporate different virtues that would belong to either of those systems, it's neither of those systems, and it's also more than those systems, since we also want to take advantage of the fact that we have knowledge and insight that they haven't, from 250 years now almost of further thought and science about these precise issues. So to our goal of being 1776 forward, really trying to
Mhm.
bring those insights into what we crafted in this document.
Yeah, well, and I would say I would go even further. I mean, not to toot our own horn, but part of why we listed out those 10 and ultimately now 11 virtues in our statement is because I would say we were trying to fill in the blanks that they left open. They talked a lot about virtue in abstract, or morality, a moral people, as being necessary to maintain a free republic. That's really that's the real meaning in which we picked up off of where they left off and tried to add in and fill in, not kind of the Judeo-Christian values or the ancient Roman Stoic values specifically. But even there, they didn't necessarily identify specific ones. They just, the time then, even, I think virtue was kind of a more widely held concept. So they could use those terms and people kind of knew what they meant. Um, in our time, that's not the case. And so that is one way in which we were definitely taking inspiration from them. And I think we realized they had hit on a key insight, but because they themselves didn't fully develop it, and because now it's been therefore lost and is even less appreciated in our current contemporary context, it was one we really wanted to drill down into. And again, like I said, it tied into, kind of, as you can kind of see, the progression of our own process or iteration. As we answer these questions about human nature at our best and identify these core values, we realized how essential character and virtue and proper action and how to think about that is intertwined with the achievement of those values. So that's why we kind of wanted to hone in on that as a key part. And as you said, it's the Article 2 and the whole section on virtues, both identifying our core values, our ideals of human nature at its best, and then the kind of core virtues for a free, functioning social being. Um, that is as close to a system as you might say we have, but again, it's not comprehensive. I'll just echo that. It's just meant to say, like, with at least these core values and virtues, we think this provides an even clearer and hopefully more inspiring roadmap to how we can achieve a free society and maintain it and grow it than we certainly inherited and had found. And so that's why we spent so much time on that. And then after doing that, those first two parts, then we felt we finally had, I guess, grounded the rationale or basis for freedom properly, like we had set out to do, not knowing all the stuff that those first principles questions and answering exercise was gonna open up for us. So, that's when we then kind of outlined, again, not a full kind of political philosophy, but at least our core universalizing principles that we wanted to kind of build around for, especially the big tent kind of movement and aim that we're trying to construct here, as you mentioned. That's where we then kind of laid down at least the basic principles of governance and political structure that as it pertains to a free society, which that may have been where we thought that's where we started of what we wanted to focus on. And then we ultimately realized it was kind of, it was the last part. And only then did we step back after we wrote all that and we kind of saw that this fit into kind of three neat buckets or categories, if you will, that allowed us to overlay this kind of three-part tripartite structure of the Article 1, 2, and 3. So, and that was the human nature at its best in part one, our ethical system of the moral applications in part two, Article 2, and then the key universals around political society in Article 3. And undoubtedly there was a little, and we can thank Joia especially for this, a little bit of stylistic, um, not borrowing, but leveraging or echoing of the founders and even our founding documents. Again, there's a
A
reason we
salute
chose
to their
a
achievement.
salute. Thank you. That's the right word because there's a reason we chose 1776 forward as our name, but this was us taking it forward, not just mimicking, kind of blindly the past. So I don't know if you want to add anything on that last point.
The last point I would really want to emphasize here is this point on iteration. I feel it's one that we've talked about before, and we will iterate on it again because it's something else that I think has just emerged from our own processes, both of observing what has worked well for each of us in our own entrepreneurial context. Like this is certainly the way that I know I work in terms of my writing, in terms of my coaching, that there's the way that you always improve and reach toward your best is you always start with something that is a first draft and then you're just iterating on it and trying to make it better and better. And I think the process that you and I have come with, I think even can be a model for what we're hoping to share and take out into the world, that we have this process where we could put forward a question to each other. We kind of each kind of put out what you might call like the first draft, just sort of the first thoughts that come to mind. And then we each sort of take a pass at, trying to write a draft, trying to edit it, trying to go back over it again. And we went through lots of iterations with this document. And the iterations are not complete because I think something that we definitely both recognize that we need, even before we get to something that, I mean, I don't think will ever be a finalized document, although I think we recognize that at a certain point you do just ship your work. But certainly that something that this document needs is even now more feedback from others who
Mhm.
would share these goals, share this first principles approach and methodology that we advocate for, and that we require even more iteration to get it into something that's even closer to a fully realized form.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I guess I would just add to that or pick up off of what you just said, and to tie it to an earlier point you made, you know, it's it's definitely not a full system or philosophy. That's not what we were trying to put forth, and it's certainly not what even is the scope that's covered in the statement. But as it pertains to at least the specific question of why does political freedom matter and why do we need and want and should we want to work towards a free society and even making it much freer than it currently is, we hoped that our first draft on answering all of these first principles questions, grounding it in this grander ideal and bigger end of maximizing human potential, freedom, flourishing, and greatness, and the ideals and virtues we put forth that will provide an inspiration and new ideas or insights for all of you out there to join us on this journey and endeavor, like Joya said, and help us refine this statement and expand what human nature at its best means and looks like, and what kind of great character and high ideals to strive for civic engagement, what in a free society, when you're pursuing those values, what it looks like. So we definitely invite you all to do that and ask your own first principles questions about human nature, ethics, the good life, politics, as we did, to add your discoveries, make them even better and sharper and more inspiring. That's definitely what we're all about and where we hope to end up, certainly at the end of this kind of TPL series that we're doing here on Substack, but as we continue in our activities at 1776 forward throughout time. And it will be, I like to think of it as a living document, even. I think that's the beauty of the US Constitution, that they wrote it for their time, but then built into it a framework to be kind of modified and adjust as fit the people, over time, but maintaining kind of the core structure. And in that way, or in that analogy or parallel, we definitely do intend for this statement to function in the same manner. And unless you want to add anything else, I think that even leads us into our call to action for this week. So, yeah, I'll just pause before I go into that, or you can even introduce it if you want. But if you want to add anything else before I do that in closing.
I would just point out that this is just another beautiful example of another one of the both and principles, the one here of being both timeless and timely, which is certainly something that explicitly has motivated us and that I think the founders' work exemplifies beautifully. That they did a lot of hard work to think about what are the timeless principles. And precisely because they did that, they left us a legacy that you and I can build from. But yet we still want to, as you said, as a living document, my idea of what it means to be living is to be on that path always of continuous growth. And so we want to have a document that can continue to grow as humanity grows and serves humanity in timely ways by building upon timeless ideas and principles.
Amen.
And then,
Well,
I guess just to introduce the call to action, I mean, you've kind of described it already. I'll just connect it back to one of our goals here, which is to even encourage people to think about their leadership, both self-leadership and leadership of community. So just if you take a moment to think about what that means in your own context, and then to ask yourself this question: if you are someone who has taken a first principles approach before, maybe this is something you've already asked, or perhaps this is just a new way for you to think about this question. But we would ask you to approach this the way we did, to say, if we were thinking about, assuming that you value a free society, and now you want to ask yourself to ground that and ask, what, from a first principles perspective, what is required, what would you perhaps come up with? And of course, we're curious to hear, because it will help our own iteration on this question too.
yeah, and I would just add a little nuance to that if we want to further break it out between the kind of
Mm.
self leadership and community leadership. Ask what are some of the first principles questions you would ask of why freedom and a free society matters for you personally as an individual, and then also for society, for a bunch of individuals working and living and collaborating together in society. So um, please do share your thoughts with us if you're so inclined. We invite you to, as always, connect with us in any way that works for you or that you prefer. Comment in the comment box below, send us a DM on Substack, respond to the email subscription, any method, email us on our website. We welcome it. And like we said, that's how we're going to refine and iterate this document, this living document and statement as well. And otherwise, we will see you again in 2 weeks for as we move into the Article 1 officially. We thought we'd start by where we started, which is the question of what is human nature at its best, and specifically, why why did we feel we needed to start there to answer the question of a free society? We kind of hinted at it earlier on in this discussion, but we'll dive into it in a little more depth since it, in retrospect, ended up playing such a pivotal role in what we ultimately put down on paper and sketched out as our vision for philosophical liberalism.
And this is the beauty and the power of the iterative process, that you put forward something, and it's only really then when you do the work to say, well, what do I really mean by this? And see what it is that you really want to save or add to or expand upon, that you really start to hone in and realize what really matters. And then, of course, just this whole series is just another way that we're iterating and doing this deeper dive on these questions. So I'm excited to see what further insights we're going to get when we actually explicitly try to answer this question of why human nature at our best. Because my recollection was this was even just a phrase that you threw out there and we both gravitated toward, but we haven't even amongst ourselves had this conversation to really say, well, why this grounding particularly? So it's going to be, I think, a fresh and
Yeah, you're
exciting
right.
conversation for the two of us, and hopefully everyone else joining
For
us.
sure. For sure. Looking forward to it. All right. As always, thanks, Joy. It was a great conversation. And thank you all for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, as always, the Philosophical Liberal on Substack. And please share with everyone in your network who you think would appreciate and benefit from it.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.